I'd been involved in the music business in the 1980s, and I was the original bass player with the band called the Housemartins. And I was with them for about 2 years. I wrote some of the songs on the first album, London Mill Hall 4. And then I left at the end of 1985, cleverly avoiding any success that I might have had with the band. So I stayed involved in music, though. I did some session work in London. I had another band called the Gargoyles. I formed a record label called Reasonable Records. Released a few albums by local artists. I'm originally from East Yorkshire, a town called Hull, or to pronounce it so you'll understand it, it's Hull with a H. And if you're even more posh, it's Kingston upon Hull. So that's where I'm from. Hence the title of the album, London Mill Hall 4. So yeah, I did all of that, and I got to about 30 years of age and thought, you know what, this music business, bit dodgy. So I decided then to retrain and become a maths teacher. And that's what I did for 24 years. And then after that, do you want me to just go on like this? I can go on for hours like this if you want me to.
Keep going.
So then after that, got married, got 2 kids. All the time I was writing songs. It was just something that I'd always done. And I found it a real stress reliever. So I'd come home and I'd write a song. And even at work, I remember I wrote a song for this girl who was moving offices. She was very upset about moving offices, so I thought, I'll write her a little song. And I wrote that song about her moving down the road to another office. And then I started to write songs for people who were leaving work. And I also started to write songs about my hometown. And so I just continued writing all through that time. I was also, for 10 years, I was in a tribute band with a friend of mine from school. Now, this friend, Dave, he liked one type of music, and that was Johnny Cash. He only liked Johnny Cash. And he was quite a large, big fella with, deep voice. And he eventually, through listening to him over many years, he sounded exactly like Johnny Cash. And in the end, he persuaded me to start up a band. So for 10 years, we did a tribute band to Johnny Cash called Keep It Cash. Then, afterwards, a couple of years ago, I'd basically had enough of teaching. It had worn me out, and I decided to take a redundancy package that was offered. And I didn't really have any idea what I was going to do with my future. But I was still playing gigs. And I played a gig in Hull with an artist called Pete Wiley, who was in a band called the Mighty Wah. Had massive hits in the 80s. Story of the Blues was one of them. And I got called up at the last minute, and they said, can you come and support them? Because the support band has pulled out. So I went along. Played some acoustic songs, and I met one of the organisers, whose name was Paul Greendale. And I got chatting to him, and as it happened, we had a very similar musical background. He'd been in bands in the 80s, but he'd moved down to London. So, and he was starting to promote acts in Hull and in London and around the country. And I said to him, look, do you think you could get us a few little solo gigs in London? Which he did. So I came down, I played about 4 gigs in 1 week. And at one of them, at a place called Paradise by Kensal Green, there was an open mic night called the Island Experiment. And they had a house band. And in the house band was the drummer, Nick Harrison. And Nick said, I really like your songs. Next time you come down, shall we rehearse? Shall we rehearse up a set of songs? And I said, well, we'll need a bass player. And Paul at that point says, well, I can play the bass. So we had a little 3-piece band. And they became Ted Key and the KIGSTONS. A lot of my songs are story-driven songs. And this particular song was about a very good friend of mine called Maggie Johnson. And she'd been a manager of one of the bands I was in, but she was by profession, she was a nurse, and she was working at British Aerospace, and she used to come to gigs, and she was one of those people who would always put herself out for you and always, you know, do things for you, and she filled her time with all sorts of things. Sadly, she passed away, and I wanted to remember her, and I wanted to remember all the positive things about her, so I wrote the song "The Queen of Ella Street," and she's the Queen of Ella Street. You know, musicians are known for their ability to consume alcohol, I guess. Of course, I'm not like that now. But it's really, there's a tradition of writing songs about drinking, and it's really a drinking song, and it's about how somebody could get into drinking because it's a social thing, especially in England. There's a big culture of drinking, and how it can gradually lead them astray. So it's a cautionary tale, really. I think there's a message behind some of the songs, but I prefer to just tell stories and let people draw their own conclusions. When we sort of sat down and thought about a band, which is very different to writing folk songs, we thought about what kind of band did we want to be, because that first night at the Island Experiments, when I stood up and I had a band behind me again, and I thought, wow, I really want to do this as a band. And all my sort of instincts for rock and roll came out. I wanted to make it louder, faster, heavier. And so we talked about what kind of things we liked. And one of my big influences is London Calling and The Clash. And the thing about London Calling is it had so many different musical styles on it. So it had some funk songs, it has reggae songs like Bank Robber, it has rock songs like London Calling itself, Spanish Bombs. So I wanted to echo that, and we just developed each song as it felt like right. So a song like As Drunk as a Drunk Man Can Be just naturally was a reggae song. When I was a child, I had a paper round, and one of the bigger boys, he got this weekly newspaper called the New Musical Express, and in there was stories of all the bands that I've been hearing on the radio. We never had a record player in the house till I was about 18. So all the music came from the radio, and I got interested in the bands, the music, and stories behind the music, and I got my first acoustic guitar. I got it for, I think, my 15th birthday, and just sat in my bedroom, getting my fingers in the right position on the cards, truly strumming away, and you know, I was a good boy at school. I wasn't a real rock and roller, really. And I did well at school. I was one of the first people. I was the first person in my family to go to university. My dad was a dustman. My mum was a mum. Stayed at home, looked after the 4 kids. And I ended up going to Leeds University, and it was really around that time that I started to be interested in music. And I started to see bands coming to the university. So I saw Elvis Costello and the Attractions. I saw The Jam. I saw Enduring the Blockheads. I saw The Clash twice. And I started to think, I want to try and be a musician. So I left university, and for the next sort of 8 to 10 years, that's what I tried to do. The sort of genesis of the band, we were very lucky because Paul Greendale, as well as being a bass player and a music promoter, he's also a music producer, and he was involved in a band called D-Ream, who had a big hit in the 80s with, what's the song called? It's called Things Can Only Get Better. See, it was in there. So he produced lots of different people. And he had a home studio set up. So as we started to record, our first rehearsal as Ted Key and the KIGSTONS, I had this little digital recorder. So we'd rehearse the song, and then we'd get the drummer Nick to play through the song on his own, and we'd record just the drums. And then Paul would take that away, cut it up, sample it, do all sorts of clever things with it, create the drum track, and then we'd start building up the tracks in his bedroom. And really, we were sort of demoing them. And then we had a gig on Portobello Road, And a friend of ours knew John Kaufman, who is the managing director and chief impresario of Right Recordings, who sat just behind the camera, but he won't come in front of the camera. And this friend of ours said, look, come and see this band, because they're really good. They've got some good songs. And he came down and he says, yeah, I like it. Let's put out an album. So then these demos started to become proper records. So we then went into some studios, went into West 11 studio in London, and recorded the drums a bit better, recorded some guitar, did better takes of the vocals. And gradually we just built it up, and it boiled down into 10 of the songs that are on the album. Favourite music of all time? Well, I've already mentioned The Clash, so I don't really overdo The Clash. I think if I had to, I think John Martin always comes to mind. John Martin is a folk guitarist, but he used this sort of pedal. And you know Ed Sheeran, huge star. And he plays solo, but he's got all these effects, and he can do what's called looping now. So he presses a looper and he plays something into it, and that loops around, and then he sort of layers it on top of it. Well, John Martin was doing something like that in the 70s, and he produced some really wonderful music, it wasn't just folk, it was funky folk and rock, and and he had a really smoky voice. So I think that kind of music really appealed to me. But when I was young, I think The Who, I was into rock and roll, so I loved The Who. My generation and all that, all the way through. Don't do it to get famous. Don't do it to make money. Do it because you love it. Do it because you like playing. Do it because you like writing songs. Do it because you like your friends who you're playing with. But please don't pursue it thinking you're going to get famous or rich, because very, very few people do that.
Okay, so we're going to do one.
Hello, you're watching 4ACETV, and my name is Ted Key, and I'm in a band called Ted Key and the KIGSTONS, and I've just been asked to talk to you for a moment on a serious topic, and I think the most serious topic to me is the world that we live in. When you look out into space, into the darkness of the universe, we can see no other planet that's like this. Okay, it's a huge universe. There's billions of stars, and yet there's only one place like this, and we've got to take care of this place. We live in a thin atmosphere around a huge planet. If we go up 5 miles to the top of Everest, we can't survive. Okay, if we go down a mile into the sea, we die. We only live on this little bit of atmosphere, clinging to this tiny planet in this vast universe. Okay. And I was inspired the other day. I was on the tube and I saw a load of young kids going out of school, going into London, and they wanted to save the planet. Okay. And they were doing it because the planet and what we leave them is their inheritance, and we so far failed them. Okay, because we haven't treated it with the respect that it needs to be treated with. And it's a precious place. And we all really need to do as much as we can to survive. Sometimes people ask, is there life out there? Well, one of the things that dictates how we find if there's life out there is for us to live as a species for a long period of time. Okay, we've only lived as a species for a few thousand years. We're a very young species. We need to live for 5,000 years, 10,000 years. We've got to think about that kind of future instead of thinking just about the now and just about more trivial things. So that's my message to you. Look after the planet.